Hey, I'm Steve Worcester. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about how to reverse a bowl and use a vacuum chuck to take the tenon off and finish your sanding. One of my favorite gizmos of all time. Stick around. You're going to love it. Okay, so for a vacuum setup, you're going to need a few things. First, you're going to need a vacuum pump. This pump sits underneath my lathe. This is a big gas pump, complete overkill for what we're doing here in wood turning. Then you're going to need some kind of gauge setup, and this is set up so that this hose will turn on and off the vacuum. Then you need some way to get the vacuum into the lathe, right? So this is a vacuum union that comes off of that accessory there and plugs into the through hole on the back of the lathe. Then you're gonna need some kind of vacuum chuck. What this does is this screws onto the headstock and allows the vacuum to come through there. And then we then put this on there. So let's start that process. Now this one is made out of plastic, printed on a 3D printer. It's made out of PETG. And then the gasket is printed as well. The gasket is made out of TPU, which is a thermopolyurethane. And this might be actually a little bit too thick of a gasket, but for this application, I think it'll work just fine. Let's go now get some vacuum. One of the most important parts of this whole system is, first of all, you need a lathe that has a through hole in the headstock. So most of the lathes nowadays do. There's some older ones, and there's actually ways to get around that. But what we'll concentrate on is the through hole in the headstock. And then the pump itself. So I have a carbon vane rotary from Gast. It is a massive beefy pump, but I bought it for multiple uses. The pump will get to about 25 inches of mercury. Fun fact is that vacuum is measured in inches of mercury, not in PSI, just to let you know that. And what we want is a pump that's capable of probably 24, 25 inches of mercury. And I would say at least 1 CFM. You don't need a lot of CFM until you do. That's kind of the problem. So if you're working with end grains where the grain that comes down the front of the bowl or the vessel is just a bunch of straws, then you're pulling air all through that. So you're going to need more CFMs to keep that steady vacuum up. And so there's other ways to do it. There's diaphragm pumps that work just fine. The one I don't know how well it would work in this application is an air conditioning pump that has oil in it. The problem with those is that if you lose vacuum or anytime you turn it on and there's no vacuum, then it's going to be spitting oil. And that mist in a shop especially might be a little bit uncomfortable. Don't know, what kind of a health hazard it is, but probably not something I would like to do. So what I've done is I've marked this bowl with a spot in the back where I was using the tailstock before. And then I can use the tailstock on here just like this and bring that up here. Now what I'm doing is I just have this lightly. I haven't exerted too much force on the headstock or on the tailstock yet. And then I take a look at that and I see that it's actually running really clean. So what we'll do is take a look at how much vacuum we can have. The more vacuum you have, obviously the more secure it is, but there is a point of diminishing return in that if you have a very large vessel, say a large bowl or something like that, and you have too much vacuum on it, you can definitely implode it because it gets multiplied as you have the size increase on the vessel. So I have a switch down here that you can't see. We turn that on, and right now we have 15, 18 inches of mercury, which is more than enough. And you can see how this is actually pulled away from where the chuck, from where the center is. So what we can do now is just bring the center up. So I leave it there in case I lose vacuum, and that way the bowl is still secure. So let's get safety equipment on and let's start taking off some wood. All right, so I have it on. You can see it's got a little bit out of round. That's fine, because the bowl was already cleaned up before I turned it back around. It was just a gorgeous finish right off the gouge. One of the few of mine, I might add. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off the tenon and then just flush this a little. I'm using a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and you just want to take some little bites, because what you don't want to do is get a catch here. While I have plenty of vacuum right now, you only have plenty of vacuum until you don't. This is actually a pretty soft wood too, so it comes off pretty easy. You can see the tail stir, the live center is just barely engaged. There are times where it's going to go ahead and stop. All right, and then just come across here a little bit. So that looks pretty good. We got a little bit of a tenon left there. There's a little bit of tear out here, definitely across here, but the bottom of my bowl is going to come across right there. So we can highlight that with a pencil. This is a number 9B pencil. The beauty of this pencil is that, other than being a solid hunk of carbon, is that it's really soft. So by marking the wood, even a soft wood, it isn't going to indent it like say a number 2 would be that you would use for, writing your letters to grandma and what have you. So now I'm going to go across this with a small spindle gouge, give me a little bit cleaner cut. You want to be careful again. You don't want to get too aggressive with your cut. Now we still have a little bit less than 18 inches of mercury. So we still have plenty of suction left, because right there I cut it free, and the only thing holding it now is the vacuum chuck. So this is where you got to put a lot of faith in your equipment, right? So we still have plenty of vacuum though. See, that's really what counts at this stage in the game. Let's put the tailstock back, and then we'll take some clean cuts, finished cuts. To clean this up, we're going to use this gouge. This has a really blunt nose. This is a gouge by Trent Bosch, which is used only for finishing bowls or finishing pieces. One side is for an outside cut, and one side is for an inside cut, which is what we're going to do here. We're backing off the tailstock and we're sliding it way out of the way. Move the tool rest around, maybe raise it up just a tad, and then take a final swipe. So what we want to do is just ease into this. And we're going to take a really small cut. That looks delightful. So there, that is super clean right across that surface. There's a little bit of an indentation there, so let's go back and, or I should say, a little pip on it. Wonderful. All right, so that does everything we need to do. Now we just have to do some more sanding on it. So like I said, well, first of all, let me reiterate, the vacuum's still on. If you take the vacuum off, it's going to lose a vacuum and your piece is going to drop to the ground, and it's going to hit everything on the way down and it's going to dent. So you never want to take the vacuum off until you're completely finished. Okay, for the sanding, we're going to use our tried and true 2-inch Mirka gold sandpaper. I think I did a fabulous job on the finish work on this to get it to the point by using a shear scraper and some tricks that John Jordan showed me using a shear scraper over the course of time. And I'm going to start at 240 grit. I'm going to use a right angle drill. This is using a disc holder protector pad, and because of the amount of warpage I have, I'm going to use a 3/4 inch, I think it is, soft pad on there as well. Now I have brought up my trusty dust collector hose. This is a 4-inch hose, and it actually has a grit on the front, a grit in case I lose a piece off the vacuum so it doesn't get sucked in the dust collector. But there is a dust collector in the corner of the room, which you hopefully won't hear so much because of the microphone. And it's a giant Oneida that does a great job. I normally would run also another dust collector in the top of the shop, but that one is a little bit closer and tends to cut in on the amount of noise, and you tend to hear it on the microphone. But what's important to note here is, since we're sanding, anytime you sand, you need to have good dust protection, dust collection. So the importance of this dust collector is not chip collection. You'll never catch up or keep up with the amount of chips that you're able to throw up here. You would have to empty a 30-gallon every couple days. So what this is for, though, is just to get the fine dust that's going to come off the sander. So let's go ahead and start that. What I want to do is put my sanding disc on there, make sure it's fairly in the middle, and then I'm going to turn the speed down a little bit, turn on the dust collector. We're going to hit the bottom. Since the bottom wasn't the cleanest part of all the cuts, we'll see how 240 works on the bottom. And then we come up the side here. What I'm doing is making sure that I don't put this flat. I'm contacting just one of the surfaces. Now you could go ahead and turn this in either direction. The heck was that? I think the smoke alarm just told me it's losing its battery. But the show must go on. Okay. So now we want to stop and take a look at it. We got a little tiny bit of tear out here from the figure. A little bit there. And then because of the vacuum, you start to clog the pores with the fine dust that you've been taking out. So you just need to be conscious of that. If nothing else, it helps assist in the vacuum because it's clogging a hole. I can see there's a little bit of tear out here, especially right here. Oh, and there's a circular mark here from the gouge. So let's drop to 180 and take care of that. All right, that looks pretty good. So what this pad does is it helps take up any variance in the surface bouncing up and down. If you didn't have the pad on there at all, and you're just coming straight across from the mandrel, then it's gonna bounce a lot. You wanna make sure that you hit all the surfaces because you have the scratches there from the 180 already. So the idea here is you're really going with continuously smaller and smaller scratches until the scratches are so small nobody can tell they're scratches anymore. To a certain degree, because they could still be there if, or still visible if somebody has really good eyesight, I suppose. All right, let's stop and take a look at our progress before we go on too further. So that tear out isn't going to come out. You could go back and recut that, but for this, it really isn't worth the time. There's a little bit here, but at some point, you got to say it's good enough, I suppose. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some pieces that I sand forever and ever and ever. But in this case, it's a utility bowl. It's going to get thrashed anyway. I still want it to be really clean. But generally, only wood turners are going to see those imperfections. You're probably, obviously you want to keep them to a minimum, if at all possible to eliminate them completely. But let's move on. 400. $600. Okay, now we have finished sanding. What we want to do is release the pressure while we're holding onto the bowl, release the vacuum while we're holding onto the bowl, and that'll drop to nothing. And then turn the vacuum off, give it a little bit of blast air, and then clean out that too. There is a filter. There is a filter in here, which you can see maybe right here. Which you can see right here. But I want to try and eliminate as much possible. So by blowing out the through hole on the headstock, the next time I put it on, or actually blow it out every time before you put it on, that'll keep it a little bit cleaner. So here's our bowl now. It's a nice utility bowl with a little bit past vertical. I like that. It's kind of mini calabash, if you will. It has a very flat bottom, which is really stable. This one's only about 6 inches, 5 inches across, but it came out great. Let's put some Mahoney's oil on it, and that's when you'll really dig it. So we got the Mahoney's oil, and by the way, this product will last quite a long time, a lot of bowls. It's a great finish. It's non-toxic. It's easy to use. I should say food safe, but I don't know if it's certified food safe. The tip does clog up, I guess. There we go. And we got a generous supply in there. Got a trusty old bike ride t-shirt. I got lots of those extras. And we just give it a good slathering. You want to get all the way around. And you see how the grain just pops. This is such a gorgeous bowl. All right. And then I don't like to put it on the back, so I just go ahead and put some more on the inside, soak it rag a little bit. And I wear gloves because I don't like getting all oily. I mean, you know. And so this was a tree that went down locally. It's probably been in the shed for some number of years. One of my favorite woods to turn. It's soft enough to where it's really easy to cut. And unfortunately, it's a little bit soft to the point where if you were to drop the bowl, it would probably dent on the floor. But it's just wonderful wood to work with. Probably the softest of all the maples. So we'll let that dry, and we'll have another great piece, whether it gets sold or we give it to empty bowls in the area. By the way, do you know about Empty Bowls? Empty Bowls is a grassroots effort. It is a bunch of potters, turners, glass makers, whatever, etc., who come together and donate bowls to a cause, and then local food banks, etc., hold an event, and people come in and they get bowls or buy bowls. And in our case, North Texas Food Bank, which has just been overwhelmed this year. Anything we can do to help out is always nice. Now, on the vacuum side, what I'd really like to do is thank Ernie Showalter. Ernie showed us back in 1990 something how to use a vacuum chuck, and without him I would have never been, or maybe later, introduced to the vacuum chuck, which is just one of the most wonderful toys that I think you can have in your shop. Next to sharp tools, it's a lifesaver. Until next time, stay safe, have fun.